Okay. I'm Christian Jaworski. I have my presentation cohorts here, Sarah Maston, Amy Pastor, and we're going to talk a little bit about commissioning and some of the current changes that we're seeing and things that we think are important and matter to everybody. So hopefully you think so too. This is an interactive presentation, so we do want you guys to have questions and make it dynamic and have your experiences as part of this. So we do want feedback. Okay, don't forget to check in. Okay, I'm going to go through this kind of fast. Okay, commissioning. As those of you know, I don't know how many first-timers we actually have in the room, but those of you who have been around for a long time, I mean, commissioning continues to evolve. I mean, everything changes, everything becomes different. As the market changes, as codes change, as regulations change, we have to change with the current times. So we're in this continual evolution pattern. Obviously, commission has always had a sustainability focus. We're talking a lot nowadays about net zero carbon tracking, decarbonization, electrification, more metering, more monitoring. Everybody's seeing that. Green certifications, Amy's going to touch on what's happening with LEED version 5, which is going to be released here really soon. And just to let everybody know, those of you who haven't dabbled in building envelope, you're going to be. It's going to be part of the fundamental track, so it's going to be required for LEED projects. So for those of you who haven't seen that, like I said, you will. And then obviously with green certifications, we're always looking for higher efficiencies. Requirements of buildings are always changing, like I said. Renewables, that's a big buzzword too. Solar, wind, battery storage is becoming a big thing. There's so many different types of batteries, it's hard to keep up with everything that's going on with that. And always geothermal is part of that too. Obviously in commissioning, the regulatory and standardization, I mean, let's face it, the reason that we have this conference is to educate everybody on what's mandated for CX for different building types. I mean, it's always changing. So the requirements for improved building performance are always changing. The good news is we've got standardized commissioning protocols and resources now. And I want to make a plug for the ACG guideline, the new revised version. I think there's a lot in there that can help people out who are just starting out. And for those of us who've been around a while, I think it's a great resource to look at systems that maybe you haven't had a lot of experience with that are coming out, as these changes are coming in. And then obviously ASHRAE, LEED, ICC codes, NFPA, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole bunch of them that dictate what we need to do. And it's all project-based. So it depends where you live and where your project is, and also what version of the various local municipality codes and national codes that you're dealing with. Okay, obviously with commissioning, digitalization, automation is a big part of this. The Internet of Things, this commissioning conference, we've been talking about that for quite a few years now. It's giving us more data. We got data collection, we've got remote testing, we've got performance analysis in that. Now we've got this AI thing that's coming out. That's going to change our industry also. How much and how fast, it's to be determined. But I see that as a big part of what's coming out in the future. We can obviously do diagnostics, predictive maintenance, data pattern recognition. I mean, all this stuff is getting a little bit smarter, more technical. Even digital twins. I mean, I'm sure people have heard of that in construction and design, but I see that phasing into commissioning too, where they actually change things and see how things go with that change and implement those changes accordingly based on what's going on. And for those of you who don't know what that is, obviously it's a virtual replica for real time. Simulation performance, so you can make a small change, figure out what happens, see if you get your payback, see if you get what you need on the energy side. And so I see that coming with us too. Obviously, we have tons of remote and cloud-based services now. That's the thing. The days of paper are gone, even though I like paper. I'm old enough to like the paper. It's not a thing that works anymore for everybody. Nobody wants to collect paper. We've also got remote functional testing. That's becoming a thing, and not just, on fan coils and VAVs. I mean, we're doing more with that now. Cloud-based software, CX software, we have a lot of that. We have a lot of vendors here that are offering us all different ways to use their products to make our lives easier and sometimes harder. You got to learn it first, but then after you do, it does become a tremendous savings. And that requires, real-time reportings. Our customers are expecting like things really quick now. It used to be you had to go and you had to make a report up, and now they're saying, well, you were just here yesterday, so I should know what's going on. And we say, yeah, log into the software and you can figure out what was happening on the report that we did online. So yeah, I mean, that stuff's real, that it's all real time. And then of course, we've got a lot of real-time monitoring, alarming, trending, system performance, predictive maintenance. I mean, the whole thing is we've got so much data. It's, more analytics, and there's more people that have to review that and make that happen. And I think that's where AI and all that kind of stuff is going to help a little bit with that. But, hopefully we don't get AI out of a job, because, we have the experience to actually know what it means. Whereas, we kind of got to teach AI that. So it might take a little bit of time, hopefully. Workforce and skills evolution and commissioning. I mean, as this new technology changes, we got to know a lot about different systems that we never thought we had to know. Right now, building envelope in the air barrier with LEED version 5, which, we'll talk about later in the presentation. I mean, that's going to be a big deal. People are going to have to know a little bit about that. Smarter building systems, equipment technology keeps improving, keeps changing. We have more field integration. Everything's talking to everything. That's the new buzz, is that we can roll it all up. Well, guess what? We got to make that happen in the field. It's not as plug and play as people think it is. There's more metering. Cybersecurity is a big thing. Everybody's saying, all the owners are saying, hey, you're getting all this data, you're doing all these things, but I don't want anybody to be able to hack my system. So what do we do with that? And so now we have, network integration, and we have IT professionals that are on the commissioning team. I mean, whoever thought that would be a thing, but it really is now. That's kind of standard, that they have to be involved to do all that stuff. What's the effect of this on the CX process? Obviously, like I said, we have to know a little bit more about a lot of different things. It's not like it used to be where we had to know, our main course very well, and we were good on that. I mean, now I'm sure, like you would all say in your commissioning businesses, if the customer asks you to commission it, yeah, sure, I can do that. I've just got to figure out how I'm going to do that. Might not have seen it. So, we're not going to say no to that. And it's really just ebbing and flowing that way, where it's a little bit of everything. What's the effect in that? I mean, we have a larger CX project team. So guess what? That communication that was so important before is now more important, because you got more players and you have to do more coordination. You got more scheduling milestones you got to meet, because, so-and-so's got to do their part before so-and-so comes back of them and does their part. And, you really can't miss the schedule. And that's, it's good and bad, I guess. More coordination on our end to make that happen and make it seamless for the owners. From an owner's perspective, I mean, obviously this skills and workforce evolution, I mean, they need to know more about how to run this building. I mean, owner training is becoming really critical. And I think we've had some presentations on that too. Just, we've got to be more effective at giving them what we did in the commissioning process with the functional testing and what we found and all that good stuff, and giving them little tidbits so that they understand what they're doing with their building, because everything's getting smarter and everything's getting, more complicated. So there's obviously more involvement on our end to do that. And I really see, virtual reality and stuff coming into play with that. It was always, a neat thing, like we did in the seminars here, to actually do that. But I see that being like, instead of, the old days of recording training, I see it being some kind of virtual reality that somebody actually does a walkthrough from the building with all the equipment, and all that kind of stuff happens that way. And it's all software based. So, there's a lot that can happen that way. And I think, as a commissioning provider, we have to look at commissioning from a life cycle service. I mean, as these buildings get more and more complicated and more integrated, and there's more real-time data, I mean, ongoing commissioning is something that's happening more and more requests for that all the time to keep it going. It's not just you build the building and you walk away. Now, we've got to build the building, and we got to keep optimizing it as we go along. I mean, everybody wants to get their maximum return out of their investment. So as buildings get smarter, more complicated, we're doing more with them. So there's more metering, there's more monitoring, more data, more analytics. And obviously the end goal of this whole thing is that we have more sustainable and efficient buildings and systems. So with that, I will turn it over and talk about what's changing with refrigerants is next.
Perfect. So how many of you realize that we're in a refrigerant changeover right now? Anybody? Oh, sweet. This is great. You guys can help me out on this one. All right. So this is pretty timely. It might be a little late for some of you, but the life cycle of the design process puts us right now in a situation where some of these buildings that you might be closing out or getting close to the end of the construction process might not have been designed for newer refrigerants that are now part of the equipment that we're seeing in the buildings themselves. So again, broad focus here for the big room. Refrigerants are pretty much in all cooling systems, right? You might have them where they're contained in a mechanical space, or with a VRF system, you might have refrigerant everywhere in the building. And that, becomes a challenge, is because once we put the walls up and, things get closed in, ceilings go in, nobody really knows where the refrigerant is anymore. So, just again, broad topic. We have chillers, we have different variable refrigerant flow systems, and we have heat pumps. And so again, it doesn't always, that's, not an all-inclusive list, but just kind of a sampling of where, we typically see refrigerants in our buildings. So what makes a good refrigerant, right? Why? This is also kind of a journey, right? We started way back, with just your standard, CFCs, and we said, okay, well, these were great for the time. And actually, I have another slide that's going to go into this a little bit more. But so we have engineering characteristics of the refrigerant itself, right? We want something that's going to be efficient, that, we're going to get a good, COP on. We have safety concerns, right? So toxicity, flammability are two of those that, we really want to hold on to. Environmental impact. So again, this is kind of where we are now. We're looking for refrigerants that have low or no global warming potential, and cost, right? And so as far as the operations and then the cost of manufacturing the refrigerant, again, something to keep into consideration. So just a really brief history. Back in 2010, R22 was phased out. The HCFEs had a high ozone depletion potential, right? And so we kind of figured that out. And we said, okay, we have a hole in the ozone over Antarctica, and this really isn't a good thing. And so whoops. One of the refrigerants that we use in pretty much all of our systems is like a main, factor into this situation. And so that phase out happened. And again, this was kind of more of a global phase out where everybody pretty much went from an R22 to an R410A, right? And so they said, okay, this is great. We've got a low, ozone depletion potential. Everybody's happy. Whoops, now we have global warming. And okay, what does this do? And let's look at these refrigerants again. And, because we all like our air conditioning, we all like to be comfortable. What does this mean? And so, but where this is kind of taking a curve in the road, if you will, is different manufacturers are using different refrigerants. This isn't a global changeover like we saw from R22 to 410A for the most part, but different manufacturers are using, refrigerants that they've been developing. So not everybody is using the same thing, which from a design perspective, and then for us on, kind of verifying design, et cetera, it makes it difficult because there's not necessarily just one answer going forward. So again, this pretty much in some manufactured systems, January 1st was a big date. Most systems needed to be using one of the newer refrigerants. And so the existing equipment, however, you had 1 year to install it. So you had to purchase it by the first of the year. You have a year to install it. Who exactly is going to police that? I'm not really sure, but we're not going to get into that right now. And then by January 1st of next year, all the VRF systems need to be using the new refrigerants. And then what that means is kind of going from now and into the future, R410A and 134A, less is going to be made each year. And that will continue to phase out, which then, as supply and demand works, if less is being made, then, and if there's still a significant demand, price is going to go up. So it really, this past fall, we've had conversations with our owners and saying, yes, you could still put in this, the 410A or the 134, but you need to know what the next 10 years are going to look like, right? And so if you're hoping that this chiller is going to last you for 25 years, you get to like year 20, you might be having issues getting the refrigerants you need. If you have a leak, if you have, an issue, the cost implication there is significant. But there's also a cost implication of changing your design too, right? So it's a little bit of a trick right now in figuring out which direction for some owners, if they're very much on it has to pencil out, of getting them to move to the newer refrigerant before it was mandated. So ASHRAE has two different standards that deal with refrigeration systems. So this one, the safety standard, is ASHRAE 15. Again, they have some definitions here. So a high probability system is a system, more so with like a VRF that has an extensive refrigeration distribution. That has, the high probability systems are where refrigerants are going to leak and it's going to enter the occupied space, right? And then there's a definition for a low probability system where, as you might imagine, it's where the refrigerant cannot enter into the occupied space. So again, where your refrigerant is, how it's being distributed, if you know where it's being distributed, and then changing the refrigerant it's not a simple swap out. So, in some of the past refrigerant changeovers, there's like a fix kit, right? Like you can drop it in, it's going to do this, that, or the other. In this case, you really can't. You really have to talk to the manufacturer. There may be a couple of circumstances where that might work, but it's my understanding that in most cases, it won't. And you also have to be talking with the authority having jurisdiction as far as like where the project is, what they'll allow for, and making sure that, you're having those conversations. It's not just an ordering a parts kit from the manufacturer that's going to make this a simple swap and everybody's going to be happy. Okay, so, and then ASHRAE has another standard, 34, which has to do with the naming conventions. And so when you're looking at the names of a refrigerant, it will often tell you the qualifications that, you need to know. And so here, the first character in the refrigerant naming is the toxicity, and the second character is the flammability, two of those things, like I said, that we want to be aware of. So if you see a refrigerant and it says that it's an A1, it means that it's not flammable. An A2L is slightly flammable, which is what we're seeing now with these newer refrigerants, is that there's a flammability factor. Or an A3, which is very flammable, because as part of the refrigerant conversation that's going on is ammonia and also like CO2. So you have what people are calling natural refrigerants. Sorry. And so, particularly on the industrial side, we're still seeing a lot of ammonia. That's a very flammable refrigerant. And there's, definite, safety and ventilation requirements, et cetera, for that. We don't see that particularly in facilities where there's like a real occupancy. But, again, I've also, had conversation with folks where they're talking about using, CO2 as a refrigerant, and that's fine. But so anyway, so these are just something to, kind of be aware of if you're talking about different refrigerants and where they fall as far as flammability and toxicity. Okay, so again, this is a couple of the newer refrigerants. You have an R454B as well as an R32. Again, A2L means that they're slightly flammable. With that comes an additional requirement for increased ventilation, monitoring systems, and safety as a whole is a concern, right? And obviously you would prefer a distribution where it's a low probability system. So having this kind of equipment in, a mechanical space that, has fire rated doors, has, additional ventilation requirements. If you hit the safety button by the door, the exhaust fan kicks in a couple of stages higher. And so any kind of leak can be contained. Versus, sometimes with the VRFs or the other systems where you might have a lot of refrigeration distribution throughout a facility, it becomes really hard or expensive to put in the correct monitoring and ventilation requirements. So if you have a building that's still kind of in construction, it is a good idea to at least have these conversations with the designers of record And so if you're not sure, to maybe look for additional shaft space, additional places where you could put ductwork for ventilation systems, or talk about, running additional conduit for wiring other monitoring systems, kind of thing. So there's a couple of ways that you can get ahead of it, instead of trying to be reactive to the changes that are coming. Yeah, so the design engineer particularly needs to take a look at the refrigerants of the systems that are being submitted in the submittal phase, right? So a lot of times we all know that just because, a system is designed around a particular manufacturer, it may not be what you get, as far as the mechanical putting it out, getting a cheaper price from a different manufacturer. We always talk about, the or equal, right? And so what does that mean? Is it about the same weight? Is it about the same, physical dimensions? Because if it's not, it might, require additional structural to support that. So the whole or equal thing is just, it's a big umbrella that you really have to pay attention to, because now if the refrigerants are different, it may kick in different ventilation requirements, different monitoring systems. So recognizing what the design refrigerants were, what is being submitted on, if they're not the same, looking into what, those additional requirements might need. Because as part of with not only the ventilation or the monitoring is the clearances. And so we talked earlier a little bit about clearances as required by the manufacturer, or clearances required for actual maintenance might not be the same. And so you might have a boiler room that's been, or a chiller plant that has been laid out with particular clearances, and now with a different refrigerant, those requirements may be different. And you as being, design, commissioning professionals and knowing that this is a thing might be able to, kind of, I'll say poke the bear a little bit, but ask those questions of the design engineer early on, just making sure that everybody's on the same page. Because when we do commissioning, we always like to say no surprises at the end. So let's have the conversation early. Let's, work out a solution. And then, again, no surprises at the end of the game. So depending on the systems, this changeover is happening, right? And so like I said, on the VRF date is coming up this coming January. Looking at the space you have in mechanical rooms, because we know architects love giving up floor space for mechanical spaces and making sure that they're all pretty and you can maintain them, right? Wrong. They're usually so tight you can barely turn around without finding yourself, in a fan blade kind of deal. So, looking at those layouts, making sure that there is a little bit of room. Again, like I said, space for ductwork shafts. Okay, if we have to run, an additional ventilation system, where could that, go through? Because you want that to go to the roof. Again, electrical conduits for monitoring systems. Well, that's nice. How do I get that to go away? Do you guys see that? Oh, no, never mind. Okay. No, that's not right. No, I don't want you to do anything. I want you to stop. Okay, sorry about that. You just want to give your owners a little bit of flexibility, because, at the end of the project, again, we're kind of talking about training, making sure that the owner understands, what it is, because these are new to them too. You might have an owner who has multiple buildings and does multiple things, and this might be new. So you want to make sure that people are at least aware. And because you don't want to get to the end of the project and them say, well, you knew about this. Why did we not talk about it? Right. And so what does this mean, at the end game? And that's all for me. Amy?
Hello, everybody. So I wanted to come up here and say, don't shoot the messenger when I give this presentation. However, myself and my partner in crime sitting right there in the middle of the room, Stephen, are partly to blame for a lot of this. So you can see both of us later. But I do want to talk a little bit about LEED version 5, because there have been some significant changes from what you are used to seeing with the previous versions. In my opinion, it's for the better. It starts to integrate a lot more of the commissioning requirements that we've all advocated for the last couple of years. But let's dive into it. So the vision for LEED version 5, which has been in development for about 3 to 4 years, was to continue to be relevant and look forward. And for those of you who were still using version 4, standards, we're referencing ASHRAE 90.1 2010 for the energy model. There really wasn't a standard reference for commissioning. It was more like, hey, do these things. So really wanting to stay ahead of the curve, look forward, and then really focus on 3 impact areas of decarbonization, quality of life, and then ecological conservation and restoration. So as we evolved the rating system, the focus was to look at ways to decarbonize with emissions reductions and operational embodied refrigerants, and now we start to talk about those transportation emissions. Quality of life is simply improving the health and well-being of the occupants. And then the conservation and restoration, which really looks at, restoring what we have degraded because maybe we're looking at a greenfield site, how we can bring back the environment and ensure that it continues to work harmoniously with nature. LEED version 5 LEED, USGBC has committed to a 5-year cycle. So again, when we look back at versions 1 through 4, version 4 took about 5 years to ratify and took about 7 years after development. This was developed, written, ratified in less than 3 years. So USGBC has charged all the technical advisory groups. I sit on the energy and atmosphere one, and then was also part of the commissioning subgroup. We are challenged to update the standard or update the reference guide and the rating system every 5 years. Now, hopefully with the way we've set it up, it's as simple as saying it's no longer 202-2024, it's now 2028. So it kind of just goes with the cycles of the standards and the codes being updated. But as systems continue to grow, as we heard from Christian and Sarah, maybe refrigerants start to come as part of the commissioning process. Maybe, we see more renewables and systems battery, commissioning battery power or battery backups. There are new requirements for platinum certification. That is a new thing. So if an owner comes to you and says, I want a platinum building, it's no longer 80 points gets you platinum. You have to get 80 points, and you also have to pursue specific credits and or meet different thresholds within those credits. So things like having no gas in a building. So a platinum building cannot have on-site fossil fuels. That's one of the requirements. So this is just something to look out for, because when we start to talk about design reviews and you hear that LEED platinum is a requirement and you're looking at something that has natural gas to the site, maybe your design review says, hey, looking at this from a LEED perspective, you realize you're not going to get the platinum certification. And then strategic evolution of user experience. How many of you have had to go into LEED Online to upload a commissioning report? Yes, it's painful. The templates are painful. So through the technical development team, they are looking at more dynamic and digital interfaces, as well as more tools and resources that will allow you to have more user-friendly experiences. So ratified, the rating system was ratified overwhelmingly in favor of adoption per the USGBC website on March 28th. There are multiple rating systems. I'm here primarily to talk about new construction, which includes core and shell, interior design and construction, which is that commercial interior fit out, and then operations and maintenance, which is the existing building. So Monday it was released, April 28th, it was released. All 3 of those rating systems and the reference guide are available for free for you to download. So the rating system outlines the requirements. The reference guide starts to give you more information on what documents, for example, are required when you complete particular credits and prerequisites. We don't have a final date for LEED version 4 closing, but it has been projected as early as March 2026. So you do still have time to register your projects. That's not a sunset date. So if you register them in March, you probably have about 8 years to complete a project under V4, but just something for you to look out for. So what does this mean for commissioning? I'm bringing Stephen along in this with me. As we were looking at this, the practicality of the things that we were asking. is really important because we as users, we've lived this pain. We've lived the pain, I would say more so of the review process. What it is very unclear what the reviewer wants. There are hundreds of reviewers, and one reviewer might say, well, you gave me a commissioning report. Another one would say, well, I only need the outline. So being more clear about the requirements and what we are expecting you as commissioning agents and then also our clients to deliver when saying this project is certified. But the good thing is, for BD&C and ID&C, it has really stayed the same. It is fundamental commissioning is required, and enhanced commissioning gets you points. For operations and maintenance, interestingly enough, there is no required retro commissioning or energy audits. Commissioning is points. There is energy monitoring and reporting required, which I will talk a little bit about and how that might impact you as a commissioning agent, and then decarbonization and efficiency plans. So just things to think about. So I'm going to dive in. I'm going to spend a lot more time on new construction and core and shell because a lot of the requirements translate to ID&C with just a few stipulations. But this is where I'm going to duck behind the podium because fundamental requirements, it's complying with ASHRAE standard 90.1 for commissioning all projects. It includes building systems, controls, and those envelope requirements. So if you register your project today and up through December 31st, 2027, you are using 2019. If you register your project after that and before version 6, you are using 2022. On top of the 90.1 requirements, you have to engage a commissioning provider by design development. So this is one that, many of you how many people work outside of the US? Or how many people work in a design build application? So this DDs, this is where I'm going to say it's probably a little bit flexible. We said design development, but I work on projects that we just have design. 100% design means your construction documents or your GMP. So a little bit of leeway there and flexibility with when you hire the CX agent, just saying bring them on early. Beyond the 90.1 requirements, we have written in things that we believe are value adds for the client. That being the assisting in developing the OPR, which you're all familiar with, reviewing the basis of design, but then really integrating your presence during the design to talk about things like Christian and Sarah said. Hey, you have this type of refrigerant. I see you don't have an exhaust fan for ventilation. That is something you consider. Have you talked about clearances for operations and maintenance when you're looking at these systems? So it is very important. We felt it was very important that we have our presence as a CX at these early meetings. So it's at least one meeting. If you are doing both envelope and MEP, you can make that one combined, but there has to be discussions on both system types within those meetings. During the construction phase, reviewing submittals and substitutions, that is really pulled from enhanced back into fundamental now. It is very critical. I don't know how you can write a functional performance test if you're not looking at submittals, okay? If you're writing something very project specific, you need to be looking at submittals. Again, attendance at meetings, and now we start to see where minimum 10% sample review of contractor completed documents. So this is holding them accountable for getting their stuff done and really commissioning readiness. I'm excited to go to the expo floor because there seems to be a lot more platforms that will allow this to be easier for you, seeing when things are ready as opposed to putting your boots on the ground. But still, you have to sample at least 10%. And then when we start to talk about envelope, it is making sure that commissioning of the envelope is included in the documentation and that you do witness a sample number of tests. And then finally, during the occupancy and operations phase, you're looking at that ongoing commissioning plan. So here's where again, I'm going to hide behind the podium. So for enhanced, which is optional, it's points. Path 1 is for MEP systems. And now, not only are you going to comply with 90.1 standards, but now you have to comply with 202 standards for the MEP systems, controls, data center process, building monitoring, and those renewable energy systems. Beyond 202, we start to, again, those 2 coordination meetings, and then looking at training. Sarah talked a lot about training, and Christian did too, how the importance of it. With these system types, it's important that they maintain their efficient operations. So reviewing the training material and confirming it occurred. Option one, path 2 goes to the enhanced commissioning for building enclosure, which looks at a number of ASTM standards and starts to show you, I mean, specifically for air leakage testing, water penetration, and infrared imaging, it starts to outline the requirements from those specific standards and gives more guidance to you, as opposed to saying, hey, do envelope commissioning. Right? That was kind of what it looked like before. So do envelope commissioning. And to be fair, when we were bidding a job, I would review. I often looked at bids from other commissioning agents if we were the MEP. The numbers are all over the board. Like, what does building envelope commissioning mean to you, to Derek, to Stephen? What does it look like to you? And we were seeing anything from $50,000 all the way up to $250,000 because they read, somebody read the spec, says I have to rent the equipment to test it, as opposed to witnessing. So this, we hope, allows that to be a little bit more leveled for you when you're preparing your bid documents. And then again, also looking at training. It is very important to train the operators. So option 2 looks at monitoring-based commissioning, and there's 2 paths for this. One is the basic software. So simply having and implementing monitoring-based commissioning, having a provider, whether it's a 3-year contract or somebody in-house that can do it, and using and following that plan with, I'll say, a simplified energy information system. So it's something that you have remote access to. It performs smart analytics, and most importantly, that dashboard. Many owners might not be as tech savvy as we are, as some of your software providers. So it's having something that's very clear that you can look at trend data. Path 2 is going above and beyond that. So now we're starting to look at fault detection. And there are different requirements because, maybe some of you are thinking, well, that's great if I have a healthcare facility. I want that, or some kind of critical data center. But what about an office building? So there are different requirements based on small or large projects. And then again, for that energy information system, it's going above and beyond basics and starting to look at more enhanced options. So for core and shell, really it's just looking at projects that are, or processes. So if you have a core and shell building and it's a warm shell and there is no or cold or warm, there is no HVAC, there is HVAC. It's only what's in the scope of that project. Or if you are doing a core and shell that's also has a tenant improvement aspect to it for a component, and there's significant integration with tenants, then you will have to include that in the core and shell CX process. So for interior design and construction, I've highlighted the differences so that you can take this back and kind of look at things, but really same standards, same process. It's just that IDNC, it's applicable to the scope of work. So if you're doing a tenant fit out within an office building, right? So it's a leased space, you don't have to commission the base building systems. That's still the case. It's just whatever is part of your scope. Again, these are exactly the same as I spoke about with BD&C. And then when you look at enhanced, again, it's looking at the scope of work, including any interconnections with the base building system that as they apply to your space, and then making sure to attend those review meetings. So if for enhanced commissioning, if there is building envelope in the scope, so alterations to 25% or more, then you do have to do specific field testing, including that water penetration and infrared imaging. So it's pretty important when you're looking at your IDNC projects to understand the extent of those envelope alterations. And then when you start to look at monitoring-based commissioning, it's really looking at the electric consumption and fuel consumption except for those without those shared spaces. So this could be tricky depending on what level of monitoring that you have. So I think of an office building. I do all of our electricity, I look at all of our utility bills and report on our emissions. I can't get this data for certain offices because it's a gross lease and they won't let us submeter. So you have to be pretty, just look and watch when you're advising on what you should be doing and pursuing this credit, because it may or may not work for your spaces. And then enhanced monitoring-based commissioning, again, it's looking at that fault detection, and then also looking at either a program or contracting a service that will do this for you for at least 3 years. So operations and maintenance, this is where I said it's optional, okay? So I can't imagine going for a LEED certified existing building without putting my hands on those systems. I don't, so maybe it's an easy point, but it's not required. So it's retrocommissioning no more than 3 years before the 12-month reporting period. So now it's not the performance period, we're calling it the reporting period. So it's that 12 months where you're collecting your energy bills, your water bills, and doing any changes to this building to get it LEED certified from an existing building standpoint. There are 6 phases, which start at the engagement phase all the way down to handoff, where you are completing that report, updating those current facilities requirements. So anybody here have experience with existing building, LEED existing buildings? Anybody? So those reports are the same exact ones that they were asking before. It's really making sure that you leave behind how to operate the systems that you may have enhanced, and then training the staff to make sure they continue that. So enhanced also has a basic and an enhanced monitoring-based commissioning, which is, again, implementing a program for a minimum of 3 years, developing that plan, training them, and then reporting on anything that happened. And where this starts to play is if you have corrective actions that need to, so there's anomalies, you've detected faults, those need to be corrected during that reporting period. And then same thing. So now we're looking at more enhanced. This is that fault detection going above and beyond. So I did want to talk a little bit about the energy monitoring and reporting. This is required. Many of the owners may not have you do this, but there have been cases where maybe there isn't existing meters that can read this data. So you might be going in and helping an owner set up to get data that you can then review, meter, monitor, and then help them report. So that's the only reason I put it in here, just something you should look out for. And then one of the credits is decarbonization and efficiency plan. So this starts to look at ways that we can decarbonize our built environment, having a 5-year plan, looking at capital that you might need, and then there are points awarded based on how much emissions and site energy that you reduce. You are going to submit this data to USGBC. They're going to come back and give you a graph of carbon and energy trajectories for the plan. And also, business as usual case, which is something that will come up a lot within the rating system. And then finally, the option 2 is carbon neutral and energy efficient. So if you have carbon neutrality, you are a high performing building because you've optimized your project already, you don't, you're getting 12 points within the emissions reductions performance, you are going to simply get these points. So again, while this may not be part of your scope, many owners have asked me to help them benchmark, and this is something that you can just add as additional services as part of your contract. And with that, please be sure to complete your session evaluation. Shoot the messenger, I guess, because I'm not just the messenger. And if you have any questions, we are here for you. Thank you.
Healthcare project in Arkansas was going to be the first LEED for healthcare project in Arkansas. According to the client, they cut LEED out. Can't afford it. LEED version 4.1. Can't afford it. So I see a lot of government contracts that are going to other sustainable rating systems instead of the LEED rating system. But what you just described ain't going to be cheap.
Yes. So I will give you the USGBC answer first, and then I'll give you Amy's answer. So there is studies. There were studies done on LEED version 4, version 4.1, and what is the premium to have a LEED certified building. If you start early enough, and early enough is defined in this study as being on board at conceptual design, schematic design, there is very little premium because you are building and integrating everything into the schedule, into the documents, the contractors are bidding it. The later you get into the process, it's a lot of those soft costs. So it's you're redesigning, you are respecifying things, you might be repurchasing things. So that's how they quantified the cost and there not being a premium. Now, if you are certifying a building, there is likely going to be a cost, and it could be extensive depending on what your client's previous design practices were. So if a healthcare facility was always using or any building was using the cheapest material, just trying to get price, then it may be at a higher premium to go buy low carbon concrete, or to get it from someplace locally because you need to reduce the transportation emissions. Since there's not many LEED V5 certified projects yet, I expect that those studies are being done. The Amy answer is going to cost more. It is going to be a premium. There's registration fees, there are certification fees. There are just things, yes, that will cost more.
We went through numerous things, and this was an outpatient surgery facility that had every bell and whistle. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've never seen 100% backup on an outpatient facility on emergency power across the electrical distribution system, plus a backup generator for that, and things like that. It was soup to nuts, everything you can imagine. Heat pump chillers. I mean, it was everything. And it wasn't driven necessarily by lead. But all I'm saying is, as they got to the point where they had the rubber met the road, that was one of the things that left. Okay. And some of the other operational things they had to keep. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, and agreed. So there was a couple states where we found out, my buddy Wade is back there, like Florida, we work in Florida it's part of the Florida building code to do commissioning. So people weren't doing it, and commissioning often falls under like an extra cost for lead. Well, it was required by code. Now, it wasn't the extent of what lead required, but at some level, commissioning needed to be done per code. So again, I think it's how you look at what costs you're putting in the lead bucket versus what you should have been doing. And then finally, is designing a higher performance building going to cost you less in the long run? So if you're putting in those high efficiency chillers versus, something else with the higher COP or a lower COP, you're looking at the payback. And so in the long run, it may cost less.
One question I have about LEED is they seem to have a one-size-fits-all approach. And we're from Alaska, so we do a lot of remote villages and, like local resources, there are none. Separation of waste, debris, and that type of thing all goes to one hole in the ground. How can we work with LEED to be flexible when you're not confined working on a building in Duluth or something like that?
LEED has a program, it's called LEED Coach. We use them a lot because if there's unique circumstances like the remoteness of your building, you can set up calls with them and say, this is the application. We're really interested in pursuing certification. However, here are the impacts. There's a regional compliance paths too. I know that they're not baked into the rating system now, but they are looking at regional adaptations. When you start to look at, Europe even, or India, and even Canada, which is, not that far from us, or right along the border, where there's regional adaptations because of things like low temperature. At some point, are you going to be able to have a building with no fossil fuels and still heat it? Well, that's part of this program. When you're looking at the decarbonization, it's except at low temperatures, or for emergency heating. So there are ways to work with them. It's really about communication, and then I would say getting a lead consultant on board that really knows how to navigate through their intricacies. Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. I have a refrigerant question. When R22 and 134A are evacuated from the existing systems, how are those being stored and disposed of? And then as they're being replaced by the new systems, you mentioned the ozone depletion, global warming potential. What are the embodied carbon emissions associated with the new refrigerants? Is that taken into account in the global warming potential? Sorry, it's a two-part question.
No, that's fine. So I think, in general practice, when you're evacuating out the old stuff, they're doing their best to reclaim that anyway, because there are, I just got a proposal for a system and they were saying, oh yeah, we still have R22. And I'm like, how is that even possible? But it is. And there are for, as long as these systems work, there's gonna be a need. And so I think they're really doing their best to reclaim that as they go. I don't think they're really destroying it. They're just using it until it's gone. On the second part with the embodied carbon piece of that, I don't really know the answer. There's so much about decarbonization and about everything that we do. It's all about trade-offs, right? And so as we're talking about, decarbonizing and looking at the embodied carbon in the systems that we're doing, and we talking in the last session about just the concrete, the steel, and those systems. And, if you look at PVC, it's a lower carbon, kind of containment, but it might not be the best material. So, it's kind of knowing what the applications are. Just because something is a lower carbon alternative, it might not be the answer. There's just different things in, a kind of a holistic viewpoint that you have to look into. So I'm not really sure. I haven't dug down into, the exact embodied carbon implications of these newer refrigerants. But, I can tell you that for the most part, the driver, just like we saw before, the driver was, ozone depletion, and now it's really global warming. And, again, just like we're talking about, this is also a journey. This isn't the end. And there's been a lot of discussion within this, actually, that it's not even stopping. Like, a lot of people aren't even stopping at this phase out, but already looking at what the next one looks like and what those pieces are. So it's just, kind of today was to bring it more to a higher level of awareness. We're still working out a lot of the details, but thank you for your question.
Could you speak a little bit about what the driver was for moving envelope commissioning into fundamental? I'm in a little bit of a niche where I'm in biotech and biopharma, and we almost never do it, but clearly that's a major consideration for folks.
So looking at, we just talked about commissioning here, but looking at the entire energy and atmosphere category, it starts to look at, higher performance buildings. So if you don't have a tight envelope, you're going to have leakage. Your systems are not going to perform efficiently. So we felt that it was very critical to integrate at least a minimal amount of testing. So going into enhanced, there's still more of that like intense testing that you're used to looking at building envelope as enhanced commissioning. But with 90.1 doing some level of witnessing and making sure of that tightness, it's just critical to the path to decarbonization.
So my question is, for envelope commissioning, is a lot of people just hiring specialized people for envelope commissioning? Because honestly, I don't feel comfortable doing envelope commissioning, and I wouldn't want to be on a lawsuit, court case where they're trying to nitpick on you, or like show us your, your expertise in something like that. So what is everybody doing when it comes to commissioning items that are not, within your expertise?
So I can answer that because two of my envelope partners are sitting in this room. Like we have envelope commissioning within my company, but they sit up in Canada, and it's more cost effective and quite honestly a better partnership to have people that we include on our proposals and work with them on our projects.
That's kind of what we do sometimes.
Yeah, no, and we also about a year ago hired somebody. She has her bachelor's in architecture and her master's in architectural science. You can't just go to any architect and have them do the level of kind of review that, there's probably more than two, but at least two kind of architects out there. And the fact that a lot of architects want to build that next showcase spotlight type of project, and there's usually a lot of glass involved. And but the individual we have, she's like very much into the details of how these things come together, how different assemblies come together, because, the building envelope isn't just masonry and glass anymore, right? There's a lot of pre-constructed panels and a lot of that is due to, people want a higher, performing envelope. But the problem is that if these panels aren't assembled correctly and there's gaps in between the panels, and the panels might be super efficient, but if there's literally, visual, holes in the envelope, it's still not going to work. So I agree with you. Like, you can't just have somebody, witness a water test and be like, oh yeah, there's water, you failed. But that kind of expertise is out there, whether you subcontract it or, kind of deal. But I agree with you. Like, I couldn't look at a building envelope and give that the big thumbs up with any kind of authority. And you're right, because it could come down to lawsuits, and you don't want to be in that situation.
So, Amy, when you wrote all of LEAD V5 on your own by yourself, which is amazing work, glad you're able to fit all that in. No, one of the things that just struck me as I was sitting here is the OPR seems to only be listed in the commissioning credit, and then you don't hire the commissioning provider until the end of DD. What's the real value other than starting your CFR early as an OPR? And was there any thought of moving that or having it somewhere indicated that the owner might need to start that or someone else?
Yes, yes, and yes. So the OPR, the way it's written, it's kind of assist in the development. Wade, I know where this is coming from. So Wade and I used to work together, and we've had many discussions on OPRs. But that's part of the reason by the end of DDs. So the way it's written is hire by the end of DDs. Ideally, you are hiring them at the start of DDs and or in schematics so that they could advise on that OPR, because theoretically that's the living, breathing document that describes everything, not just the mechanical systems, not just the envelope commissioning, but everything that's going into that building, the programmatic pieces, even as much as the occupancy, which all then goes into LEAD and helps you, develop the rest of the credits too.
So I find it really funny, though, as part of this, where she's saying, you need to be hired, the commissioning provider, by the end of DDs, because to me that means that you're hired in the middle of CDs, but you go back and you review the DD set. So there you go.
Yep.
I got a quick question. You brought up before, which I agree with, that the state of Florida requires by code since 2015 that you have to have commissioning. And other than Polk County, which is the most backward county we have in the state, is the only one that's actually enforcing it. Well, what's that? Oh, they're enforcing it because they're doing LEAD, but they're kind of. Oh, well, good. Well, I'm glad to see someone else is doing it. Good. I've been going to the building departments and arguing. But the reason I'm bringing this up, because in the new code has basically said you have to do envelope testing. You have to do blower door testing on every building. You think they're going to ignore that like they ignore the commissioning? I just want to, because you talked about things that should be part of the contract that you shouldn't be paying extra for, but clearly you are paying extra for because they're not doing it. Or they're going to say, no, the contractor's going to do it. Yeah, we're going to have the fox watch the hen house, right? So I'm asking you very candidly, it's an issue. How do we solve it as an industry with the building officials to make them do what's in the code? I remember when after the hurricanes, and they now started to make us put hurricane tie downs, and they had to meet certain wind criteria so they didn't blow away. They didn't enforce it until the next code cycle because most of the manufacturers weren't able to do it. That I understood completely. Commissioning is not something, okay, can we do it? We know how to do it. There's people that know how to do it. So, sorry, but.
No, it's okay. And so one of the first clients, so we do a lot of entertainment work being in Orlando. Disney has their own jurisdiction, Reedy Creek, and they started to enforce it. And it was even to the fact that they went back and added commissioning to ongoing projects because they said, oh my gosh, we should have been enforcing this for a long time. There are clients that we will tell them. So if there's projects that we're working on in Florida, part of it is to get more money for our services. We say, it is required by code. It is a lot less. I mean, you go and you do testing, you write a preliminary report, you give them a final report. So it's not much, but then they've seen the value. As far as enforcement, I mean, the only thing we can do is go to the building departments and say, are you enforcing this? And advocate for it, because otherwise they're not going to do it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
So that's what I did in Broward County. We actually had a class for all the building officials to explain to them what commissioning is, because half of them didn't even know what commissioning was. And ever since that course happened, a lot of the building officials, mechanical inspectors, they kept going on board and enforcing it in their plan reviews.
Well, you must have better magic than I do, because one of my former employees is the head of the building department, and I can't make her get it to do it in Hillsborough County. So, but I do the same thing, Amy, is where I tell the clients, hey, it's required by code, but nobody's enforcing it.
I think that's all for today, folks. So right now we're standing between you and lunch. So have at it.
Thank you.